Okay. Hi there, logs. Welcome back to the log. A couple of Christmases ago, I had something of an open world video game binge. The glorious current gen version of the milk chugging chicken leg Jesus. The glorious current gen version of the milk chugging chicken leg munching simulator that is The Witcher 3 had just dropped, and Sable, an indie gem that I'd been watching for years, finally made its way to PlayStation. Open worlds have become something of a contentious topic in recent years, specifically those that adhere to the so-called Ubisoft formula, but playing through these two games simultaneously actually wound up being a really enlightening experience that got me mulling over the many ways that video games can use their open worlds to make you feel things. Open worlds are not the devil, as it turns out, and they don't herald a boring or rote experience, despite what Ubisoft have been trying to convince us of through their Assassin's Creed games. Open worlds are a narrative device, they're a way of telling stories. Just want to flag a mini spoiler alert here for both games, by the way. We're going to be talking storytelling, and that means talking about the respective stories of The Witcher 3 and Sable. More than that though, we're going to be talking about open worlds and how Geralt of Rivia sort of hates me. So grab a cuppa, engage your Witcher senses and fire up your hover bike. Let's get started. The Witcher 3 is a modern classic in my book. Despite its truly epic scope, it's written with a warm humanity that keeps you invested in its often intimate personal stakes. It's sort of a cozy game for me, one that I've comfortably sunk hundreds of hours into, and one that I come back to over and over. It's certainly not unimpeachable though, and one well-worn criticism of the game is that it relies maybe a little too heavily on follow the dotted line to the objective quest design. If you're not familiar with this line of thinking, here's a brief explainer. Some critics have lambasted The Witcher 3 for guiding the player around its huge map by the nose via this little dotted line on the minimap, without leaving much room for the player to explore independently. This isn't a critique that ever really resonated with me personally though. Now the reason that this isn't a problem that I've run up against is because of the way that I choose to play The Witcher 3. The very first thing that I do upon starting a new game is to completely excise the HUD in the name of immersion. You see, while the dotted line might be the default way of getting from A to B, it's far from the only option. You can turn off or minimize the map and all of the handy status indicators with a minimum of hassle. As a side note, this is also the objectively correct way to play Cyberpunk 2077, and I will fight you to the death if you disagree, but that's a video for another time. I also choose to play The Witcher 3 on the hardest difficulty, which I don't mean as any kind of humble brag, it's just the sweet spot where the game is most engaging for me. On this higher difficulty, I know that I can take no more than 2 or 3 hits from any given enemy before dying, so why bother with a health bar? I know that I'll start taking toxic damage if I drink more than 2 Witcher potions in quick succession, so that status bar isn't of any use to me either. A tone plays when the cooldown timer on my spells is up, and my minimap still appears when I use my Witcher senses, so I'm never in any real danger of getting completely turned around. So I turn off all the bars, all the quest markers, all of the aids and the indicators, everything, it's all gone. And in doing so, I nip that dotted line criticism in the bud before it ever becomes a problem. When I, a superior class of person, have an objective, I simply pop up my minimap for a second, orient myself and just chad walk in that general direction until I find it. What this does is it allows the many attractions of the gorgeous open world to take centre stage, and they're more than happy to take the spotlight. Crumbling, mossy ruins, prowling wolves silhouetted against the full moon, the shadow of a griffin passing overhead, it's all thrown into sharp relief, and I'm no longer incentivized to gallop past any of it by a GPS navigation line that's egging me on. Playing this way also has the effect of making me act a little more like Geralt would. It gets me moving through that open world as he might, and it turns traversing that wide open space into a much more interesting and involved proposition. All of a sudden I'm imaginatively contending with the world and with Geralt's limitations as a character in a way that really puts me in his shoes. I'm asking myself, do I have enough health potions to take on this bunch of ghouls? If not, can I rest and brew more? Do I have enough ingredients? Where's the nearest place to get them from if not? Where's the closest fast travel point? if I use that fast travel point, what will I miss that I could have found if I just walked? The open world of the continent, when stripped of these peripheral distractions, really does an excellent job at inviting you in, at having you roleplay as a grizzled professional monster hunter. Aside from the continent being just gorgeous, I think the way that it can put you in Geralt's shoes is really its main achievement. It's a great example of one of those things that open worlds can accomplish better than a more linear experience. It can create a sense of inhabiting a story. And The Witcher 3 does a great job of that for a while. Your mileage will vary depending on how far that kind of roleplay will carry you. For me, it's usually about as far as Skellige. I get about halfway through the main campaign, I come to this brand new area, and the wind just totally leaves my sails. Skellige should be my favourite part of the world. It takes liberal inspiration from my home country of Ireland, even its name. The Skellige Islands are a real place off the Irish coast. Skellige's piney, wintry aesthetic also just really appeals to me, and the questing is great, but in spite of that it winds up being a major hump for me every time. It's always around this point in the game that the gulf between me, Evan, sitting in front of my TV, and Geralt of Rivia the monster hunter starts to yawn really wide. I start to feel this pressure from the game, this friction where I chafe against the character that I'm occupying. The open world is still begging me to track down Witcher gear and black pearls, but Geralt increasingly feels like he doesn't want this. He doesn't have the time. Geralt does not want to play cards with every merchant, and he doesn't have the inclination to make a handful of coins killing drowners, even if they're called something different in Skellige. No, what Geralt wants is to find Ciri and save the world from the Wild Hunt, and I can't help but feel that he's totally sick of my shit. He's like, Evan, mate, can we hurry the fuck up, please? I feel bad dragging Geralt around doing all this bullshit when he has a daughter to find, you know? His desires as a character begin to diverge from mine as a player as the story progresses, and the open world winds up being a wedge driving my motivation and Geralt's further apart, despite being the very thing that once brought us closer. Just realised as I'm recording this that sounds as though I'm going through a breakup with Geralt of Rivia. This dissonance short-circuits the part of my brain that was enjoying LARPing as Geralt. Our interests aren't aligned anymore. While you can fool yourself for a while by turning off the HUD and losing yourself in the wilds, The Witcher 3 is still ultimately a game where you follow a dotted line from story to story, whether that line is visible or not. The feeling of your journey not being your own does inevitably set in eventually. The open world, as excellent as it is at making me feel like a Witcher, ultimately winds up mostly just being a really pretty container for stories. I don't think that I would have been able to articulate the role that the open world of The Witcher played in my commitment issues to it, had I not been playing through Sable alongside it though. Now, I often describe video games the way that I did above with The Witcher 3. I'll say that they're visually beautiful, or awe-inspiring, or artful even. I'll say they make me feel excited, or immersed, or engaged in a good story. It's very seldom though that I have the opportunity to call a game serene, but The Witcher 3 might be a cozy game for me, familiar and well written, but Sable. Playing Sable calms a part of my soul that I didn't know needed calming. Coming from The Witcher 3, I was immediately struck by the elegance and the minimalism of Sable's stunning visual art. It's something that has to be seen in motion to really appreciate it. I remember looking at screenshots and being impressed, but the first time I booted it up, I yelled at my partner, "Video games could have been looking like this the whole time, are you serious?" Sable's visuals and design philosophy echo the elegant minimalism of the bande dessinée style of art popularised by European comic strips like Tintin and Asterix. How the fuck do you say Asterix? Sable isn't taking inspiration directly from Tintin though, but from the more realistic take on that style that characterises the art of Jean Giraud, aka Mobius. If you're at all familiar with Mobius's work, a quick glance at Sable was probably more than enough for you to spot the inspiration. It's not Soule. Just as a quick aside, did you know the guy who created Tintin, Georges Remy, was an accused Nazi collaborator? He continued working on Tintin for a publication that continued operating through the Nazi occupation of France during the Second World War, when their peers largely did not. Now you might be saying, I'm sure he was just doing what he had to in order to get by, but I would counter with, did he really have to do this? Was this necessary? Jesus Christ, George. The bold lines and colours and the low contrast that Mobius used to so effectively create a sense of vast space permeates not only Sable's visuals, but also every other facet of the game. The whole thing sings with this same stripped back dynamism. The art, the open world, the gameplay and the narrative are all working together to achieve a singular goal, shaving down the space between you and Sable to the absolute bare minimum, which is the polar opposite of how The Witcher's open world wound up making me feel. In The Witcher 3, the open world is a playground. It's a container of stories and characters that uses eye-catching landmarks to direct a player toward those attractions. It's a toy box in a way, it's full of wonderful stories for me to take out and examine and then put back when I'm done. In Sable, on the other hand, the open world is the narrative and the gameplay. It's not just a space in which those things are contained. Traversing the world is what you do in Sable, and exploring is the main thrust of the story. Now, I know exactly how pretentious all of that has sounded. I run these scripts past my girlfriend before I record them, so I have a pretty good gauge for when I'm starting to get insufferable. So, I'm going to try and explain what I mean and why it's important. Sable, the character, not the game. This is going to be confusing to talk about, bear with me. Sable is a young woman in the interstitial space between childhood and adulthood, and her game is the story of her gliding, which is a coming-of-age ritual where a young person breaks away from their tribe and ventures by themselves out into the world. The whole point of the gliding is to find yourself in that wide-open nowhere, to decide what role to play in society as an adult by choosing a corresponding mask. Masks are earned by proving yourself worthy to the adults of that profession. Will Sable be a merchant, a scrapper, a wandering entertainer, or a cartographer? Well, Sable doesn't really know, and at the beginning of our time together, I certainly didn't either. She's on a journey of self-discovery, and as someone who knows nothing about her, or the world of Midden where she lives, so am I. It's the same reason that so many games begin with an amnesiac protagonist, because it gives you a foothold in the world. It's an excuse to ask questions and interrogate the environment. And this is what I mean when I say the open world is both gameplay and narrative. Sable's story is written in footsteps across the desert, punctuated by handholds in a cliffside. Sable and I excavate ancient ruins, we climb to lofty heights to speak with map makers, we collect minerals on lightning-blasted plains, and we ride our hoverbike into an endless horizon. Each of those activities are chapters in her story, but none of them are explicitly necessary to progress along the narrative's arc. Where the story of The Witcher 3 is a path laid down before you, in Sable the story is written behind you. At the end of your journey, you and Sable look back over the trails that you've trekked across the desert. You see the marks that you made on those you met, and you make a choice about the future based on what you both learned about the world and the people in it. The real gliding is very literally the friends we made along the way. The destination is never a mystery in Sable, it's truly all about the journey, as cliche as that might sound. In this way, exploring the open world is the goal and the gameplay, and my curiosity is always perfectly in line with Sable's. When I feel done with the world, the story's over. I go back home and pick Sable's future and that's it. Unlike in The Witcher, if I wanted to go and visit the giant worm I'd befriended or just climb up a tall tower for the joy of it, in the fiction of the game, Sable herself is just fine with that. The gliding is, as the name suggests, a time where an adult-to-be can fall without fear of landing. When Sable first embarks on her gliding, she's given a piece of mysterious technology that allows her to float down safely from great heights, really driving this metaphor home. Where I almost felt like I was convincing Geralt to play Gwent with me, my intent and Sable's were always completely in sync from minute one to minute done. And this all comes down to the way that the designers used the open world to allow me to tell a story through the medium of Sable the character. Going with Sable to meet new people, flying over the dunes on her bike, climbing every cliff, that was the story. It was one that we wrote together. Like I said earlier, the open world is the narrative, is the gameplay, instead of just being a container for it. At the end of Sable, you have to help her choose her mask. We always knew where the journey was going, we always knew that it would end with choosing a mask and choosing a future. But I think that sense of inevitability hanging over the journey, the sense that it was always going to come to an end, was part of why the choice was one of the hardest I've ever had to make in a video game. In doing so, I thought about the quirky people we'd befriended, the stories we heard, and the philosophies that Sable had tried on. I thought of the adults that she'd met and how they treated her, some were unkind, some treated her with respect, and still others with the well-meaning condescension that teenagers are so often met with. I reflected on this story that we'd told together, on the singer that we met in the cave on the edge of the map, on the lonely cartographers with their lofty balloons, and on the kindly, melancholic Hakoan crystal farmers. Who did Sable want to be now? Where was her space in the world? Where was this funny tandem story that we were sharing going to end? What was Sable going to do after I shut off the game? I love following Geralt's adventures on the continent. I love having a hand in the way that things play out. I love following the tangled web of plots crisscrossing that vast open world. I loved pretending to be a Witcher for a while. When I closed The Witcher 3, I closed the lid on this wonderful treasure chest of stories and characters that is the continent. And I want to be clear here, I didn't call The Witcher 3 a toy box derisively. It really does feel like a cave of wonders, with every person and monster in its depths polished to a mirror shine. Sable is the co-author of my journey through Midden, though, where The Witcher 3 is Geralt's story alone. Something about the authorship afforded to me by the way Sable tells a story with its world felt so fresh to me. Sable's elderly friend tells her, and by extension me, as a player, what an adventure you had. And it was just for you. I can't help but feel the truth in that. By tying the exploration of Midden to the narrative and to the gameplay, by making exploration the goal, Sable allowed me to tell my own story, a singular story, alongside Sable herself. In doing so, I was able to capture something fundamental about the nostalgia and the melancholy of becoming an adult, or maybe unbecoming a child. By using its open world to tell that story and not simply as a container for it, Midden became personal to me over 20 hours in a way that the continent wasn't able to in 200. My memories of Sable are tied up in that world, and my memories of The Witcher 3 are tied up in its characters, and that's not a bad thing, they're good characters. But it so often feels to me that video games are an excuse for an open world. Like there's no good reason for them to have chosen to place their stories in a sandbox like that. And I did wind up feeling that way about The Witcher 3 by the end. Sable nails the opposite. It's an open world that truly justifies the video game around it. Thanks for watching. Whew, okay. This one was really fun. I had a lot of fun putting this together. This was adapted from an old essay on my blog. And here's some backlog lore for you. The channel is called that because the blog was called that. And the blog was called that because A, I was really broke at the time and couldn't afford to write about all the new games that were coming out. So I decided to play stuff that I had never played before, all my old PS Plus free games that I downloaded out of spite and never actually played through. But also because B blog, I thought that was really clever. Now that I say it out loud, it's kind of cheesy, but so it goes. I'm hoping to talk about Outer Wilds next time on the channel. I spoke at the end of my last video about an Outer Wilds project that I was working on. It's specifically about the soundtrack, and even more specifically about the vinyl soundtrack. It's a video that's truly for two people. Mostly one person, who is me. I'm about halfway through the script on that one, so hopefully it will be fun. I think it will be fun. If you enjoyed this today, please like and subscribe and share the video with your friends. Let me know in the comments if you feel the same way about The Witcher 3. I'd be curious to hear your opinion on that. I know it's kind of a beloved classic, so being critical of it maybe is a little controversial, but I'm okay with being a little bit controversial at times. Thanks as always for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye.